43 years ago, a 19-year-old girl in Hartley, Kentucky, walked out of a diner on a cold October night and was never seen alive again, leaving behind a half-finished cup of coffee, her father's wristwatch loose on the counter, and a town that would spend the next 4 decades pretending it had moved on. The sheriff at the time believed she had run off with a boyfriend nobody could name. The state police closed the file within a year, but her mother never believed a word of it. Leila Mercer stood at her kitchen window every evening until the day she died, watching the road, certain her daughter would come walking back up it. She was right about one thing. Diane never left Hartley. Not really. Then, in the spring of 2024, a cold case detective fed a 43-year-old sample into a database that had not existed when the crime was committed, and a name came back. A name everyone in that town already knew. A name they had trusted with their broken-down cars, their children, and their Sunday mornings. But before we get to the man who hid in plain sight for 43 years, you have to understand the girl he took. You have to understand who Diane Mercer was, and the town that loved her. Hartley sat in a fold of the eastern Kentucky hills, a town of maybe 1,200 people strung along a 2-lane road that followed the Licking River wherever it wanted to go. In the autumn of 1981, it was the kind of place where the screen door of Calloway's diner banged shut 100 times a day, where the jukebox still played Patsy Cline for a dime, and where nobody locked a door because nobody had ever had a reason to. The men came home from the mine with coal dust pressed into the creases of their hands. The women hung wash on lines that caught the wood smoke drifting down from the ridges. On Friday nights, half the town parked their station wagons at the drive in 2 counties over, and the other half listened to the high school game crackle through a transistor radio on the porch. Diane Mercer was 19 that fall, and she belonged to that town the way the river did. She had worked the evening shift at Calloway's since she was 16, refilling coffee for the same farmers every night, and she knew all their orders before they sat down. Her father had died in a mine collapse when she was 11, and she still wore his wristwatch, a heavy steel thing that slid loose on her thin wrist, because taking it off felt like letting go of him. She was the kind of daughter who walked her widowed mother to church, and the kind of sister who helped her younger brother Tommy with his arithmetic at the kitchen table. And that fall, she had a plan. She had been accepted to a nursing program in Lexington, and in 3 weeks she was going to leave Hartley for the first time in her life. Everyone knew Diane. Everyone watched out for her. When her mother's old Ford wouldn't start, it was Earl Pruitt, the young man who ran the tow truck out of the Gulf station, who came by after dark and fixed it for the cost of the part. When Diane's shift ran late and the rain came down hard, Earl was the one who sometimes gave her a lift the half-mile home, because that was the kind of town it was. People helped. People trusted. On the evening of October 23, 1981, Diane clocked in at Calloway's at 4 o'clock, the same as always. The leaves had turned, and the air smelled of wood smoke and the first frost. She poured coffee. She laughed with the regulars. She told Mrs. Calloway she'd see her tomorrow. She never knew that night would be the last ordinary one of her life. The diner closed at 9. Records from the original investigation show that Diane finished her side work, counted her tips, and left through the front door at 9:14 p.m., according to Mrs. Calloway, who locked up behind her. It was a half-mile walk home down River Road, a walk Diane had made 1,000 times in the dark. The night was clear. The temperature had dropped near freezing. A few cars passed her on the road, their headlights sweeping the gravel shoulder. At 9:40 p.m., the phone rang at the Mercer house. It was Diane's mother, Lila, calling Calloway's to ask why her daughter wasn't home yet. "Mrs., Calloway told her Diane had left 25 minutes earlier. 25 minutes for a 10-minute walk. Lila put on her coat. She walked the road herself, calling her daughter's name into the dark. Halfway between the diner and the house, near the old iron bridge, she found it. Diane's wristwatch. Her father's watch. Lying in the gravel at the edge of the road, face up, still ticking. That was when Lila started to scream. By midnight, half of Hartley was out on River Road with flashlights and lanterns. Men who had worked a full shift in the mine walked the riverbank in the cold. Women kept the coffee hot at the diner. Earl Pruitt brought his tow truck and ran its spotlight along the water, calling Diane's name with everyone else. The CB radios crackled across the hills. By dawn, they had found nothing but the watch. The county sheriff arrived the next morning. His name was Wendell Stamper, and he had held the office for 19 years. He looked at the watch. He looked at the quiet road, and almost immediately he reached the conclusion that would haunt the case for the next 4 decades. A 19-year-old girl, 3 weeks from leaving for the big city. A watch dropped in the road. To Sheriff Stamper, it added up to a simple story. She'd run off, maybe with a man. Girls that age did that, he said. She'd turn up when she ran out of money. Leila Mercer told him her daughter would never leave without saying goodbye. She told him about the nursing program, the brother Diane adored, the church she never missed. She told him Diane would never, ever take off her father's watch and leave it lying in the dirt. Sheriff Stamper wrote down that the watch had a worn clasp. He suggested it had simply fallen off. The case was logged as a likely voluntary departure. No crime scene was secured. No cast was taken of the tire tracks a deputy noticed in the soft shoulder near the bridge. The road was reopened to traffic by afternoon. Diane Mercer had been gone for less than a day, and the people whose job it was to find her had already decided she was not lost at all. Not everyone in the sheriff's office agreed with Wendell Stamper. A young deputy named Raymond Cole, 24 years old and only 2 years on the job, had grown up 3 streets from the Mercers. He had gone to school with Diane. And he did not believe for 1 second that she had run away. In the official record, the case barely moved. Stamper kept it filed as a runaway and took no formal statements for the first week. But quietly, on his own time, Deputy Cole began doing the work the sheriff would not. He drove to Lexington and confirmed with the nursing program that Diane had paid her deposit and was expected for orientation. Records show he interviewed the regulars at Calloway's, one by one. He measured the tire impressions near the bridge before the autumn rains washed them away, and he kept the plaster cast in his own locker, because there was no open file to put it in. While the deputy worked, Leila Mercer waged her own search. She printed flyers on the mimeograph machine at the church and drove them to every county within 100 miles. She called the state police so many times that they came to recognize her voice. She stood at her kitchen window every evening, watching River Road. Her son Tommy, only 14, learned to cook his own supper, because some nights his mother simply forgot. There was one suspect, early on, who seemed to fit. A man named Carl Jennings, in his late 20s, had asked Diane out twice that summer, and twice she had politely said no. People had seen him lingering at the diner. For a few weeks, Deputy Cole was certain. He pulled Jennings in and questioned him for hours. But Jennings had been 3 counties away the night Diane vanished, helping his brother move, and 4 people swore to it. The records confirmed it. The lead collapsed. It was the first dead end, and it would not be the last. Cole tried to interest the state police in the tire cast and the dropped watch. He wrote a report arguing that the evidence pointed to abduction, not a runaway. but the report had to go through Sheriff Stamper, who declined to forward it. A girl's missing watch and some tire tracks on a public road were not evidence of a crime, the sheriff said. The state never opened a parallel investigation, and so the months passed. Winter came to the hills. Diane's name slipped out of the county paper. The flyers in store windows began to yellow and curl. Leela kept driving, kept calling, kept watching. Deputy Cole kept his locker full of evidence nobody official wanted. Then, in April of 1982, 6 months after Diane disappeared, 2 men cutting firewood in a wooded hollow 4 miles upriver found human remains. Dental records confirmed what Lila had known from the first night. It was Diane. She had never left Hartley at all. The discovery of Diane's remains should have changed everything. It changed almost nothing. By the spring of 1982, the scene was 6 months old and 4 miles from where she had vanished. There was little left for investigators to gather, and the technology to make sense of what they did recover simply did not exist yet. The coroner ruled her death a homicide. Biological evidence was collected and sealed in an envelope, logged into the county evidence room, and, because there was no suspect to compare it to, left there. Sheriff Stamper retired that same year. The file was marked unsolved and put in a box. For the Mercer family, the box was the rest of their lives. By 1985, 4 years had passed, and Leela still set a place for Diane at Christmas. By 1990, Tommy had grown up and left for work in Ohio, unable to stand the sight of River Road any longer. The drive in 2 counties over closed down. The diner changed hands twice. A new generation of children walked to school past the Iron Bridge with no idea what had happened there. Raymond Cole never let go. He made detective, then eventually sheriff himself, and through every promotion he carried Diane's file with him. He kept the plaster tire cast on a shelf in his garage, wrapped in a feed sack, for 30 years. Every few years he would pull the biological evidence and ask the state lab if anything new could be done with it. Every few years the answer was the same. Not yet. He retired in 2011 without an answer, and he told a local reporter that Diane Mercer was the one who would follow him to his grave. Leela Mercer died in 2009. Her neighbors said that on her last clear afternoon, she asked her son to make sure the porch light stayed on. She had kept it burning every night for 28 years, in case Diane ever found her way home in the dark. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through old records, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserve to be remembered. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video, subscribe, and let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Your support is what keeps this work alive. Now, let's get back to Diane. The case stayed cold for 43 years. Everyone in Hartley, but 2 people, a dead mother and a retired sheriff, had given up. And then a detective who had never met Diane Mercer opened the box. In 2023, the Kentucky State Police formed a small cold case unit, and a detective named Alice Reynolds was assigned to review unsolved homicides from the eastern counties. She was in her early 40s, methodical, the daughter of a state trooper herself. Records show she pulled 41 boxes that first year. The Mercer file was one of them. What caught her attention was not the watch or the tire cast. It was the sealed envelope from 1982. The biological evidence, collected at a time when it could tell investigators almost nothing, had been stored cold and clean for 4 decades. To Reynolds, that envelope was not an old dead end. It was a question that finally had a way to be answered. She sent the sample to a private forensic lab that specialized in a technique that had not existed for most of the time Diane had been gone. The process works like this. Scientists build a DNA profile from old crime scene evidence and upload it to the same public ancestry databases that ordinary people use to find long-lost cousins. They don't look for the suspect directly. They look for his relatives, and then they build the family tree backward until only one person fits. It took months. Reynolds spent her nights tracing branches of a family she had never heard of. Names from old census records and church registries, marriages and deaths across eastern Kentucky going back a century. And then, on a Tuesday morning, in March of 2024, the tree narrowed to a single living man. Reynolds stared at the name on her screen. She read it again. It was a name attached to an address less than 9 miles from the Iron Bridge, where Diane Mercer's watch had been found 43 years before. The man was 71 years old. He had lived in the same county his entire life. She picked up the phone and called the one person she knew would still care. Raymond Cole was 78 now, long retired, his garage still holding a plaster cast wrapped in a feed sack. When she said the name out loud, the old sheriff was quiet for a long moment. He knew the man. Everyone in Hartley knew the man. Tommy Mercer was 60 by then, still in Ohio. When the detective called to tell him there was finally a name, he sat down on his kitchen floor and wept for the sister he had helped with arithmetic at a table 43 years ago. The porch light, he would say later, had not burned for nothing after all. The man whose name appeared on Detective Reynolds' screen was Earl Pruitt. For anyone who had lived in Hartley, the name landed like a stone through a window. Earl Pruitt was not a stranger. Earl Pruitt was the town. In 1981, he had been the friendly young man who ran the tow truck out of the Gulf Station, the one who fixed Leila Mercer's Ford after dark for the cost of a part, the one who sometimes gave Diane a lift home in the rain. In the decades since, he had stayed and become a fixture. He had run a small garage on the main road for 30 years. He had coached Little League. He sat 3 pews from the front at the Baptist church every Sunday. When your car broke down on a back road outside Hartley, Earl Pruitt was the man you called. And he always came. And he had been there that first night. Court documents would later confirm what old-timers slowly remembered. Earl Pruitt had joined the search party. He had run his tow truck Spotlight along the river, calling Diane's name into the dark, standing shoulder to shoulder with the men hunting for the girl everyone now believes he had already killed. The signs, in hindsight, had always been small. A neighbor recalled that Earl had repainted the bed of his tow truck that winter, though it had looked fine before. Another remembered he had seemed jumpy whenever Diane's name came up at the diner, and then, over the years, that he simply never mentioned her at all. Nobody had thought a thing of it. Why would they? He was Earl. Detective Reynolds did not rely on the family tree alone. She obtained a warrant and collected a fresh DNA sample from a discarded coffee cup Pruitt left at the very diner where Diane had once poured coffee for the regulars. The lab confirmed it. The profile from the 1982 evidence and the profile from the coffee cup were a match. On a morning in the summer of 2024, state police cars rolled quietly up the main road of Hartley and stopped in front of Earl Pruitt's garage. He was 71 years old, in coveralls, wiping his hands on a rag. Witnesses said he did not run and did not argue. He looked at the detectives for a moment, then set the rag down on the workbench. "I've been waiting a long time for somebody to come up that road," he said. It was the closest thing to a confession he would ever give. The arrest shocked the community to its core. People who had trusted Earl Pruitt with their cars and their children stood on the sidewalk and watched in silence as he was led away in handcuffs. Some wept. Some were furious. All of them understood, in that moment, that evil had not come to Hartley from somewhere else. It had lived among them, fixed their flat tires, and smiled at them in church for 43 years. In early 2025, facing the Dina evidence, Earl Pruitt pleaded guilty to the murder of Diane Mercer. He was sentenced to life in prison. He will almost certainly die there. It is easy, in a story like this one, to let the man at the end swallow everything, to remember the case for the monster who hid inside it. But that is not who this story belongs to. Diane Mercer was 19 years old. She worked the evening shift at a diner and knew every farmer's coffee order before he sat down. She wore her dead father's watch because she could not bear to let go of him. She walked her mother to church. She helped her little brother with his arithmetic at the kitchen table. And in 3 weeks, she was going to become the first person in her family to leave Hartley, to put on a nurse's uniform in a city she had never seen. She had a future that belonged to her by right, and a man she trusted took it on a half-mile walk she had made 1,000 times. When the sentence came down, Tommy Mercer drove back to Hartley for the first time in decades. He visited his sister's grave, and then he drove to the cemetery where his mother lay, and he told her, out loud, that Diane had finally come home. The porch light, he said, could rest now. The case changed the county too. The new sheriff ordered every piece of evidence from every unsolved homicide in the region recatalogued and tested. Diane's case became the reason 3 other families in eastern Kentucky may yet get answers of their own. Raymond Cole, 80 years old, was there in the courtroom the day Earl Pruitt was sentenced. He had carried that plaster cast in his garage for 30 years. He said he could finally put it down. Justice is a strange thing when it arrives this late. It cannot give Diane back her nursing degree, or give her mother the daughter she watched the road for until the day she died. But it can do one thing. It can take a name that was hidden for 43 years and write it down, permanently, beside the truth. How many other envelopes are sitting in evidence rooms across the country right now, holding answers that the technology to read them already exists to find? What does it say about the people we trust most that the most dangerous man in Hartley was the one everyone called when they needed help? And if Deputy Raymond Cole had given up the way the system around him did, would Diane Mercer have ever come home at all? Tell us what you think in the comments. Justice came for Diane Mercer after 43 years. Stories like hers remind us that the truth, however late, always finds its way back into the light. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.